This is the Sound Meets Sound podcast. Welcome, Holly Roadfeldt, to Sound Meets Sound. Why don't you just say, a quick, who you are and what you do?
I'm a pianist. I started off thinking that I wanted to be a professor full-time. My father was a professor, and so since the age of 6, I thought that that was the job. I mean, I really wanted to have that job so badly. And I went to school and did all the right things, supposedly, although I was a little bit of a rebel, and went to bachelor's, master's, doctorate with the idea of having that academic position. I finally got my tenure track position, and I was there for 5 years, and I was miserable. And so now I am actually putting together lots of different things of being a musician, but what's been really interesting is that I have worked as an opera rehearsal pianist. I've done a lot of chamber music. 20 years worth of chamber music. I've taught kids, I've taught adults, I've taught college kids, I've taught lectures, and then I've performed. So I really feel like I've done almost everything that I wanted to do. It's just to do it more intensely and to do it more creatively and to have more experiences. But it definitely wasn't a specific path.
Yeah, I was reading your interview on the cross-eyed pianist for Meet the Artist. You said there that you didn't take the path that a lot of concertizing pianists take, which I thought was interesting. I didn't realize that you actually had a tenure track position, so you left that to become a full-time pianist, essentially.
Well, actually, I went someplace else for a little bit, and part of it was because Kirk and I, my husband Kirk O'Riordan, and I are part of this academic couple, and we could never find someplace where both of us could have full-time positions. And so we would be following each other around, and this actually started from when we were in graduate school. So we really couldn't even find a place where both of us could go to graduate school together. Oh. So I would follow him, he would follow me, and we just go back and forth and back and forth. And so the other person got used to trying to find something really, really fast. Right. So I think that what ended up happening is that Kirk found a position at Lafayette College, and that's where we are right now, at Easton, in Easton, Pennsylvania. And it's a perfect fit for him. And it's a perfect fit for him because he can do all sorts of things that he loves to do. And so now I'm kind of piecing things together. And it's nice. It's actually a blessing and a curse of where we are located, because we're an hour outside of New York City, like an hour and a quarter. Great. And we're about an hour and a quarter outside of Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. And it's so close yet so far, because people don't think of you as a Philadelphia musician or think of you as a New York musician. So it's hard for you to get, if you're in that position, to get noticed as, hey, really, I've worked with New York musicians, or I've worked with Philadelphia musicians. And then the people in my area, they're really excited about people living in Philadelphia and really excited about people living in New York. So there's a lot of commuting. I spend a lot of time in my car. But it's been interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a real struggle. But that is cool that you are split between New York and Philadelphia. So yeah, the downside is no one fully adopts you. But you also, you get to see both of those scenes. And it's funny, Philadelphia and New York aren't that far away from each other, but I don't think they really mix that much. I mean, what is your feeling on the Philadelphia scene, especially the new music scene?
Well, I know a tiny bit more about New York than I do about Philly. I'm trying to think of experiences that might be interesting. But the one that I've really enjoyed playing, that I found to be thrilling, is I play in Andrea Clearfield's salon concerts. And I've done this twice. And the first time I played a work written by Charlie Peck, and it was called Metropolitan. And it was this suite of pieces, and it was really, really terrific. And I was telling my husband about it when I went down and I came back, and I just was blown away at how into it the audience was. I mean, the audience just was mesmerized by every performer and so enthusiastic. And I mean, it was really just this dream audience. And she's been doing this for 30 years. This was actually her 30th anniversary.
Wow.
And so I didn't do it for a couple of years. And then I wrote her again because I wanted to see if I could play some Chopin preludes and some preludes by Kirk. Now, she really packs in all sorts of different performers, so you can only play for a short amount of time. You play for 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. And so here I'm agonizing. I'm like, which preludes do I choose from Chopin and which do I choose from Kirk? And I brought him, and I really wanted it to be a good experience for him. And he doesn't get overwhelmingly impressed by things, and that's what he was. I mean, he just could not believe it, because when I played his preludes, we could hear people cry.
Wow.
And so when you have that experience where you can actually feel the emotions of everybody there, because they're sitting on the floor, they're sitting on the balcony, you're being surrounded. And then right after I played these preludes, this really incredible violist and her sister, this wonderful pianist, played the Rockberg Sonata for viola and piano. So, I mean, you had these experiences where you had all sorts of different types of music. And so sometimes she'll have Brazilian music, and then she'll have somebody play something that's new music, and then something classical. And so she'll just mix it all in. And actually, the person ahead of me had made his own instruments. So he was doing this demonstration of all these really cool instruments. And then I play Chopin and Reardon, and then we have Rockberg. And that experience, I mean, if you could use that as a model for so many concerts, I think you'd have really an overwhelmingly positive reaction from people, because it's just music and they wanted to feel, and they all felt.
Yeah.
That was neat.
Salons are really great for that. And since you bring up the Chopin and Kirk's preludes, I just wanted to talk a little bit about your Preludes project and the CD that you just released, which I really enjoyed. I was wondering if you could clarify for me. So the Preludes project, like, there are different prongs, right? Like, so you played a lot of different composers, and the CD is Chopin and Kirk's preludes. So is that correct?
That is correct. It's kind of a longer story, and I'm sorry, I guess I could talk about this for a little bit, but yeah. It had a lot of different developments as it went along. And really, I feel it's important to say how this whole thing started, which was back in 2013. I was hired by the Maurice Chouinard Dance Company from Montreal. It's a modern dance company, to perform all the Chopin preludes. And when I say that I was hired, it was because they were doing it at Lafayette College. And what they do is they hire a local pianist wherever they're performing it, if that's what they want to have performed. And so then they'll just do it with a live pianist, and the pianist is over to the side. Oh. And actually, they did choreography to 23 out of the 24 preludes. They cut one. They don't tell people that. They say it's the 24 preludes, but it's really interesting. They cut one.
Oh,
but but for me to play these preludes that had these characters, this association, I should say, of just really, this is what a classical pianist does. And then to see it with modern dance, it totally changed my perception of the preludes. But on top of that, as a pianist, we learn, I mean, the first actual piece that I ever played, and even though it was arranged, I consider this my first classical piece, was Chopin's C minor prelude. Mm-hmm. And I was 6 years old, and I fell in love with it. And my hands were really small. And I wanted to play it so badly. And my piano teacher scoffed at me and said, your hands are small, you can't do it. And her mother, who was also a piano teacher, said, if this little girl wants to play this piece, you figure out a way how to make it work. Yeah. And so her mother actually rewrote it and wrote it so it would just be fifths and sixths. took out the octaves,
That's cool.
and I got to play it. And so that was the very first thing. And so that was my love of Chopin. But I played, of course, a couple preludes that everybody plays when they're younger, when they're starting to really get into classical music. But then piano teachers move you to the scherzos, to the ballades. Mm-hmm. Maybe they'll teach some waltzes, and you start to learn all these other things, and then you forget about all the other preludes.
Right.
So I really didn't know the 24 until I was hired to do this. And so when I started thinking about them and thinking about them as a collection, and I started preparing them, and I saw how Maurice Renard interpreted them, then I really thought it was a good idea to mix and match them with contemporary music. Well, Kirk already had this idea, and he had started composing. And this is probably yet another thread of a conversation, but when Kirk composes piano music, I don't really know what he's doing until he's at the end. I mean, when he first started composing and we were in the house together, then I would know a little bit more. He would kind of run things past me, but we got to the point where he really wants to have it done. So he can compose for months, and I will not know what's happening.
Right.
And that's okay. I think that's actually good. And you being married to a composer, you probably have a similar situation.
Exact situation. It's like, wait, you just composed this whole set. Like, when did that happen? Yeah.
Right. When did that happen? Right. So he finished 26 preludes because he didn't want to have 24 along with Chopin. He's like, he's either going to do 22 or he's going to do 26. Okay. So he finished the 26. And I thought, this is actually a pretty good idea to have collections of smaller preludes. And I wanted to play some Rachmaninoff, and I wanted to play some Debussy. And so I started contacting a few composer friends. And I said, would you be interested in writing some preludes? Well, what's funny is that, everybody has a different idea of how they want to go about preludes. Like some composers, they don't want to just write one prelude. And one composer, I really asked for one or two from each of these composers, and one gave me 6, and one gave me 9, and one gave me 5. And so I ended up with quite a collection. So I ended up with, this is going to, the numbers are all kind of funny. There were 64 preludes that I received from the people that I said, would you like to write preludes for this project? So 64 total. But then I also had a couple people that just said, this hasn't been premiered. Would you mind premiering? And so I had 2 people that sent me those. And then I had, so a couple I'm going to be premiering in a few weeks because they were just written. And then some of them were written in 2014. So this is it's been a long arc. But what it ended up being is that there are 15 composers that I premiered their works. And so I was actually hoping that I would start off with a CD with the preludes, and then I would go on and I would do another CD in a couple of years and mix and match with other composers and do it with, let's say, Rachmaninoff or Debussy. But people, they write some preludes and they want to do something else, and suddenly they go on and do something else. And I think that I'm really happy with all the concerts that I did, because I ended up doing, more than 40 full-length recitals of all sorts of mix and match preludes. But the nice thing is that I never did the same program twice. Right. So there was always something that I could put together. And so as far as the CD goes, Parma Recordings had just released Kirk's Strange Flowers disc, and that also came out, I believe that came out in November of 2013. And so when I played with the dance company, that was in March. So for Kirk's, they were interested in my playing from that CD, and they asked what sort of projects I was interested in, and I told them about this, and so they really thought that was great to mix Chopin with Kirk. So that was kind of steered in a certain direction, because I just said I had just done this and I was thinking about this, and they had a really good way of saying, yeah, I think this could happen. But it ended up being, it was a lot of music, so it ended up being 2 CDs, and it was a pretty huge project, and so that's how it came about.
You touched on this. Do you think you will ever try to record the 60-some new preludes that you got, or do you think you're not thinking about that right now?
Well, I think that one, I'm actually recording, and I've recorded some, and I'm going to be recording 2 more in a few weeks. Mara Gibson's prelude. She wrote this at the end, and actually, I had talked to her about doing a future project, and this is actually my For Lisa project, where it's just women composers. Mm-hmm. But she had these ideas for preludes, and so they kind of were able to straddle both of my projects. And then she was also writing them as a response to some really great artwork by Jim Condren. And so by putting all of this together, and we said, well, we covered this and we covered this. And so these 6 preludes are going on her disc, which is going to be released in November. Oh. And so then Kayla Pearson is another person that she wrote me this incredible prelude. I mean, just dynamite. And I probably have performed it 20, 25 times by now. And I just love it. Mm-hmm. And then she wrote me another one that I also love, but she wrote that 2 years later. And I performed that, I don't know, maybe 6, 7 times. Mm-hmm. And so she's planning on writing one more prelude, but then she was hoping to put those preludes on one of her discs. Gotcha. That's coming up. So I think some people kind of had it in mind that it was part that they could use it for their projects. And I think I think that's where it's going more than just having it with me. I don't know.
It's cool how many different directions that one performance with the dance company took you. And I just wanted to talk a little bit more about the CDs, just because listening to that, I had heard things of your playing on, I think SoundCloud, and whatever you have on your site. I'd heard little bits and pieces, but this was my first deep listen of your playing, and I saw that you, in your interview with the cross-eyed pianist, what's her name, Fran Wilson?
Yes.
That you had listed Martha Argerich as one of your inspirations, which I found, because when I was listening to you, I was like, she really, every note has its own touch, the touch for you, the nuance. When I listen to your playing, I just feel like every single note has been given thought and has a specific muscle reaction. It just seems so, the spectrum just seems so bright, and wide. And that's what I always loved about, or have always loved about Martha Argerich's playing, is it's very similar. When you listen to her play, you feel, it's almost like you can feel her playing it because the touch is such at the fore. So I was just wondering, A, if you think that's a good assessment of your playing, and B, is touch something that you really think about? Am I just picking up on something random, or, what is your thinking about touch and piano, which I know is broad, but I find really fascinating because it's such, it's a percussion instrument, and you think, oh, you can't have that much variation, but there's so much variation in the tone color you can get out of the piano. So I don't know, do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, first of all, I think I'm going to need a week to recover from that compliment, because, wow, you probably pretty much said what every pianist would be dying to have somebody say to them, oh my goodness, thank you. Wow.
Sure, it's true.
So, to even be in the same sentence as Martha Argerich, everybody is just like, oh my gosh, really? Yeah. I'm glad this was recorded because, right. I can prove that you said it. Anyway, but that's nice. Thank you. But I think that you touched on a couple of things that I think are really important. And one, I'm going to share a couple of anecdotes, brief. First of all, when I was doing my doctoral comps, I had this amazing instructor, and he was his name's Alan McMurray, and he was the band director at the University of Colorado. And I learned so much from him by playing in the University of Colorado Wind Ensemble, and I did several concertos with them, and I traveled to Japan with them, and he really, I just learned so much. But he asked me a question about the piano as a percussion instrument, and I got a little aggravated, and I said, I'm sorry, I just don't see it that way. I just don't see the piano. And he ended up, because I was so difficult to deal with, he had to drop the question because I'm like, I'm sorry, I just don't see it. I forget it. I just don't see it.
Right.
And, you know, afterwards, after I matured a little bit and I'm like, okay, I know what he was going for. And, you know, boy, I handled that badly. And I'm just going to chalk it up to maybe stress. I don't know. But I think that it's really important that I see it as a singing instrument.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is where my training as being the rehearsal pianist for operas, and I played with hundreds of singers. I think this is a big part of my playing. And so one of the things that Kirk mentions a lot, he says that I do spend a lot of time listening to voice leading. Mm-hmm. So I've taught theory. I teach my students theory all the time.
Yeah.
I'm constantly talking about how one note leads to the next and making sure that you're fluid and getting your breath behind it. Mm-hmm. So there's that combination of the singing, the combination of making sure that you're moving physically for that sound. And I should also say that one of my great inspirations, great mentors, was Rebecca Penny's, and she did this series, Motion and Emotion, for the longest time. And she had danced with the San Francisco Ballet for several years. And so she was really into the physical fluidity. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes you have with pianists, there's a physicality that's very aggressive, that's very athletic. Mm-hmm. And dancers are also very athletic, but not in the same way. And so I think when people see me play, they're constantly talking about how my arms are moving and how I am doing it in a way that is like, that it's choreography, they say. Mm-hmm. But there's a reason for the choreography. It happens before the sound. It doesn't happen after the sound. And so I think that you can tell the difference even when you're listening, that you have to have something that is going to change the sound. So I'm hoping I answered your question as far as the sound, because again, I'm still like, oh my gosh, thank you, Meg, Martha Argerich. But no, she really was my favorite, all for so long. She was fantastic. Yeah. But yes, there is a lot of thought that goes into every single thing I do when I play. And I think it's becoming even more so when I get older, because I think that since I was an accompanist for so long, we got used to taking shortcuts. Because you had to produce, you had to sight read, you had to go out and do something, they gave you the music in an hour, or, tomorrow or next week, or, 5 minutes or whatever. And so you started to figure it out, like, okay, I can cut this, I can do this, whatever. Mm-hmm. And I think when I stopped doing that, and I had the opportunity to really find out all the inner workings of a piece, then I became more selfish. And I just decided, it's not enough. I don't want to cram anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. Right. I love playing chamber music, but I don't like cramming. Yeah. And so I think that because the sounds now are more important to me. Right. So thank you for saying that.
Yes. And what you said definitely did answer my question, because, you were talking about choreography, and you're talking about music theory, and you're talking about actually getting to know a piece really well. All those things point to this thing of every note is thought about, that nothing kind of goes by the wayside. And I find that really interesting. I was talking to Megan Enan about singing, and she was talking about her practice and her teaching, and I was learning things about where I had failed as a singer, not in a negative way, but just things that I could learn. And now listening to you talk about how you approach the piano, which is what I started on, and then I moved to organ, it makes me want to get back to the instrument now and think about those things, because my life as a keyboard was what you were talking about, the cramming thing. It was all about cramming. I was always the last minute accompanist, or I was the church organist cramming 5 new hymns in my brain the morning of, things like that. And yeah, you lose the connection with your instrument sometimes. It just becomes like you get what you can out of it in the shortest time possible. So I'm glad that we that happened for you, that you were able to get to a place where you didn't have to cram all the time, because now we get all this beautiful playing. So I'm sure it was beautiful too before, but yeah, there is.
But no, actually, it was different, and it's interesting to hear. It's interesting to hear my recordings from 20 years ago or something like that. And I was a little bit more aggressive then. I mean, when I think about my playing, and I really went for it, and now I'm a more polished player, but sometimes I listen, I'm like, wow, okay, all right, well, maybe I could bring a little bit of that back, occasionally.
Right. Yeah,
but it was that athletic drive. It was that, I am here, I am present. And I'm sorry, I'm getting on another tangent, because I think about that. Like, I still thought about the music very intensely. And when I would play, I would be the pianist that people would hire to play these really big, loud, brazen pieces, or these really intense, like big song cycles.
Right.
And I remember that I would play something, whether it was the Hindenburg trumpet sonata, where you end with "All Men Must Die," or I would be playing, some big Schoenberg thing, and at the end, I wouldn't smile when I bowed. And people would always yell at me, and they'd say, "Why won't you smile?" And I said, "I just played this big piece. Right. I just played this. This is serious music. Why would I smile?" Okay, well, now I've gotten over that. But I think at that moment, that was it. It was like, I wanted everybody to feel everything that I was feeling from, the rest of the evening. Right. They had to feel it, until the next day. And, right, that's pretty funny right now. But I think, that was a big deal for me. So I can't say that I didn't think about it, but I couldn't really produce it necessarily in every note, in the details.
Right.
It would be the broader way.
Right. Yeah. Anyway. The broader strokes, like passion of youth,
Right. Exactly.
Right. Yeah. And that urge, that need to communicate. I wanted to actually rewind a little bit to something you said about playing with a wind band. Maybe you could talk about that experience and how you got into doing that, because I never really thought about piano. There's pianos in orchestra, all the way in the back by the trombonists. But what were you doing with a wind band? I've never really heard of pianists playing with wind bands before.
Oh, well, see, this is fantastic. And I have to say that, honestly, this is a very important part of who I am as a musician and my experiences with this, because it started at Eastman when I was an undergrad. And actually how it started was I was playing contemporary music then. And so I was premiering works by student composers. And somehow, I'm trying to remember the very first time I played, but I can't. Because I knew the conductors who were conducting the new music ensembles, they were also conducting the wind ensemble. And actually, one of them was Mark Scatterday, who is now the conductor of the Eastman Wind Ensemble. And as a doctoral student, he really helped me out as an undergraduate. And there were two of them. Jeff Renshaw is another one, and he's at the University of Connecticut now, I believe. But both of them really told me how to be an orchestral musician. So I was that within the wind ensemble, with the Eastman Wind Ensemble, way before I played with orchestras. I think that's a little bit of a fib. I think I probably did a little, but at a high level anyway. Yeah. And so, when you're playing with really, really, really great players, and they told me how to do it. Actually, when I would be way in the back, and I was afraid of how to do it, and I took conducting lessons, but they were showing me all these ins and outs, and I felt really comfortable. And so, but I remember the big piece that I learned was Schwantner's "In the Mountains Rising Nowhere," which has this really great solo piano part.
Oh.
And then when I went to Indiana for my master's, one of the requirements for all the master's students is that you had to do 3 hours a week worth of accompanying. And this guy who was doing the accompanying assignment said, "You know what? I can't find anybody to play with a wind ensemble. Would you be willing to do that?" And I said, "Yeah, of course." And so then I met Ray Kramer, who was the conductor there. Again, fabulous musician, really incredible. I played with him for 2 years. I was so happy, and I played a lot of great music and premiered a lot of great music. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, I considered him a very special mentor. By the time I got to the University of Colorado, again, another mentor was Alan McMurray. And so I played Rhapsody in Blue with them in Japan, and I played the Husa concertino, and I had played the Pearl concertino for piano, and that was at Eastman. And I also played this Lenve concertino, and I feel like I'm missing some things, but there's several concertos that were really incredible. Oh, the Hindemith, music for piano, brass, and 2 harps. Oh. So, and then also because I was playing with them, I got all these concerto opportunities because the graduate students needed to do conducting recitals. So one of them, and here's the last one that I had forgotten, he wanted to do the Stravinsky. So I got to play the concerto for piano and winds by Stravinsky because it was on this, his conducting recital.
Right.
And it's Tom Berrier. And actually, so all these people who are really serious musicians, I got this opportunity pretty much because other pianists didn't know about it, didn't want to do it. And I bet if they knew that it would lead to a bunch of concertos and all this great mentorship, I think they would have changed their mind because I got a lot of really great experiences from that.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm amazed. I never in my wildest dreams would have thought about that as a pianist playing in wind ensembles or with brass ensembles. I mean, you said you got mentorship around that, and the conductors, at Eastman were helping you figure that out. I mean, how does that even work? I mean, the attack with the piano and with brass, and wind, it's so different. It's so varied, and the balance too is really. I guess your power as a pianist really came into play there, competing with those louder instruments. I mean, what kind of advice were they giving? I'm just totally indulging myself here because I'm just so fascinated. Sorry.
Well,
everyone.
No, actually, see, this is the one thing. I mean, you have, as a pianist, you have that opportunity to play with all these instruments. Mm-hmm. And I was playing with trumpet players and tuba players and trombonists. And then, of course, when I went to Indiana, I played with a ton of saxophonists, and I learned all this incredible literature. And so I was playing with these instruments where I'm kind of laughing. I'm because I shouldn't laugh at other pianists for this, but it was so funny because when pianists were starting to do chamber music, and when I was at Eastman, they would be, "Oh no, I only want to play with string players. Oh no, I only want to play with singers," and they got kind of uppity about it.
Right.
And I thought, no, you should just play music, right? So you should just play whatever happens. Mm-hmm. And it was my first week. Now I can go back to, I can't believe I forgot this part, but probably because I didn't think it was important. But I was my first week at Eastman. So my first week at Eastman, and there was a trumpet player who was trying to find a pianist to play the Aratunian concerto. Mm-hmm. And he needed it to play it for studio class, and it was the next week. So again, this is one of those quick things. So he says, "Will you play the Aratunian with me, this freshman trumpet player?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And then I remember looking at another pianist who needed to have a quota for that week, and I said, "Is it okay if I play this?" I said, "Or did you want to do it?" And I remember he looked at me and says, "I can do much better than play for a freshman trumpet player." Oh. But what happened is that I played with that freshman trumpet player. Mm-hmm. The next week I played for 3 graduate students, and I played literature that was really worth learning, Hindemith and Halsey Stevens Sonata. And then there was another one that's a little lesser known, and so I remember that. But all of those players were doctoral students, and it was because they heard me play the Aratunian. Oh. And it was them that got me into the contemporary music ensembles, because it was their recommendation, which led to the wind ensembles, which led to the concertos. So it really came down to the Aratunian trumpet concerto, and it came down to me willing to do something that somebody thought, "Oh, I can do better than that."
Right.
You shouldn't really, think that way, because there's really that opportunity. So how the conductors helped me was they helped me breathe.
Mm-hmm.
So as a pianist, at that point, I wasn't really considering breathing as being as important as it was.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you play, and again, that when you think about that percussion instrument, and I hadn't played in big ensembles, not much, a little.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I'd sung in a choir, I'd done high school things, but not to the level. It wasn't like all these kids who were in their honors bands and who were in their really top flight things. I mean, we're talking, they were miles ahead of me as far as working with a conductor that's first rate.
Right.
And I just didn't know. So they were showing me that if I couldn't interpret the conductor, and because sometimes they go off and they do some loop-de-loops that are outside of the pattern that I was like, where are you? I don't know where you are. And so they said, watch this person. Like, they told me who to watch and to watch their breath. And so there was one gentleman, and he was a graduate student. He was playing bass clarinet. He says he will always know when to come in and watch his breath and go with him. Oh. And he was right in front of me. So it was one of those things. He said, eyeball the people that are always completely rock solid, and figure out where their breath is and breathe with them. And so I started doing that. And it was great. It was great. You just brought me down to a very happy memory lane. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense with wind and brass instruments, that breath would be a big deal.
Of course. Yeah, no, I mean, it is. But, it's also just how you interpret the score.
Yeah.
And so, but I would do these things that I remember I was playing, all sorts of different like jazz influences or pop influences, and I was pretty square. And they would help me out stylistically too. Oh. So I think that when you're a pianist, you're a classically trained pianist, you play pop music on the side for your own, but you don't really know how to integrate. Right. And so I think that was another thing that they helped me with. And then just to get the opportunities. And that Schwantner, to know that I played the Schwantner, which still, I just love that piece, to play it in Indiana, and then also I played it as a doctoral student, to have that opportunity to play something like that. And then, of course, Schwantner was on the faculty at Eastman at that time, and then I was able to talk with him. And so I think this whole thing, as far as new music, it really came from those experiences. Mm-hmm. So, the Artunian. I owe a lot to those doctoral conducting students. I really, really do.
Yeah, I've never had a conductor. I've never been in a group long enough to have a conductor come to me and say, "Here's what you can do to figure this out," or "Here's how to do this better." So yeah, you play a lot of new music, and I kind of was curious. I don't know if you can talk about it. You're going to Avaloq this summer, right?
Yes.
So what are you? Can you talk about what you're doing there, or is that something you would be interested in talking about?
No, I think I am really excited actually about going to Avaloq, because I am one of those incredibly envious people of composers who get those residencies, like the MacDowell Colony, and boy. Oh, what I would give to go to the MacDowell Colony. Oh, my goodness. And a whole lot. I mean, my goodness. That's so great. But Avaloq is a really, really terrific opportunity for performers. And I went last summer. And I actually went last summer because Kayla Pearson, who is the queen of residencies, and she knows all about these things and has done so many of them, is so successful at that. She said, we could actually go as a composer and a performer. It's just that it's because it's performer based, you have to write the application. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, all right. So I did the application thinking that, gosh, you're never going to pick me, because I just felt so silly. But they have this opportunity mostly for ensembles that aren't able to rehearse together. And so then they can have that intensive time that they can do this. But I was able to go with a composer. And so, and Kayla and I had a really good experience, and she learned more about the piano, and I got to play some of the pieces that I'd been performing of hers even more with her, and then she's starting to write this other piece. But I thought, when I was watching other people, I had a little bit of performer envy, because there was this performer. She's fantastic, Ashley Bathgate, and she's a cellist and from New York, and a lot of people know who she is. But she was working with several composers, and I'm like, that's what I want to do. And I was just like watching it, and I thought, okay, now she's able to do this, and now she's able to do this, and I wanted to do it so badly. So what I did was I contacted one of the people who is helping organize this, and I said, I have this kind of wild idea, and I'm wondering if you think it'll fly. And he says, yeah. He says, I think this will work. So I'm actually going to be there 2 weeks with Kirk. But the first week, I'm going to be there with Megan Einen and Tony Lynn. So how this is working is that Kirk is writing some art songs, and he's writing a song cycle based on poetry from this wonderful poet who teaches at Lafayette College. And she's the one who did the libretto for his opera, his last opera, and his only opera, but it was just premiered, I should say. But anyway, he had already given some songs to Megan before. And then Tony has written 3 pieces for me so far and is writing 2 more. But he's also doing things like with looper pedal, which I've never used. And so I was really excited to have an opportunity to work with him. So I would work with Kirk, and then Kirk was also writing a piece for piano and electronics. But I could really work with Tony. I could also work with Megan, where we're doing these pieces and of Kirk's. And then Tony wrote some pieces that Megan and I are doing. So that's the first week. And then the second week, I'm going to be working with Ann Moss. Now, Ann and I have been talking to each other via Twitter for a long time. And I'm really amazed with all the music that she is doing, too. And so then she and I are going to work on a number of different pieces, different song cycles. And then also she's going to work on Kirk's songs, because he had contacted several singers. And then she was working on some pieces with Griffin Candy. Now, Griffin had contacted me about 6-9 months ago about writing some piano pieces. And so I said, hey, if you want to come in on this, you're already working with Anne, and you and I can work together. So each week I'm working with 2 composers, plus a singer. But then we're also having just all of this mix and match. But I think what's so funny is that there's all this opportunity at Avila to kind of craft your own schedule. And Megan, who is also is very organized, and she knew that I wanted to have like a very organized session. And she was an absolute dear about this. She says, okay, well, what's your perfect schedule? And I said, okay, here's what I want to do. And so like I kind of figured it out. And I told her how excited I was to practice and to kind of hole up and do all these things. And then Kirk, who is an amateur guitarist, can't wait to play with Tony, who's a phenomenal guitarist. And so, like, there's the opportunity for play and for serious work. And so I'm really thrilled that I was given this opportunity to do this for 2 weeks, and I can't wait just to be able to learn music for 2 solid weeks. I'm so excited.
Yeah, it sounds like musician, especially new music performer heaven,
Yes, it's bliss. It's absolute bliss. Yeah. So, and last year when I went, it was interesting to be around all sorts of different musicians, and how they took advantage of this opportunity is that it could be in different stages. And I think you have to know where you want to be in that stage. Like if you want to do this like you're just figuring it out, or you want to have it closer to performance, if you want to work with a composer as he's writing or as she's writing, or when it's done and you want to kind of get feedback at the very end. And that's what I really like about Tony and I being there, and what we're going to accomplish, and then what Griffin and I could do, and then what Kirk and I could do, and just to have all those experiences. So yeah, it's really good, especially since Kirk really wanted to do these art songs, and I said, okay, you need to work in this way, and I can help you, but I need this type of singer and I need this type of singer. And so having Megan one week and Anne the next week, then I know that we can really collaborate well. And so I think then I can give Kirk that opportunity to hear what these are going to be like. And right. I'm looking forward to working with singers again, after, like I said, doing that for many years ago and then coming back. Hopefully it's, like riding a bike. So,
right.
I've worked with some singers since then, but, that really intense work. So, yeah.
Well, and so I just was wondering, you're talking about working with Kirk and with singers. I mean, as a pianist, what is it that you, not necessarily bring, but for want of a better term, what is it that you bring to a session with a composer, whether it's Kirk or another composer, where you're working, there's a new piece? I mean, what is it that composers are looking for, to gain from you as a pianist in these kinds of sessions? Are they early on, or is it, like you were saying, like the piece is finished and there's some feedback? Like, how has that process worked for you?
It varies from composer to composer, and I couldn't answer that fully because I think that some composers are so excited to have their piece played that I think that is going to be a little bit different. I mean, I can tell you how I approach it.
Yeah.
And people have asked me. I think a lot of this comes from what we've already been talking about. And that I did so many pieces that I would say were like more drive-by performances. So I would get a piece, they'd want it premiered, and I would do the premiere, and then we'd never talk again, just because it was the sort of business transaction that they just wanted to have that particular piece done, and then that was it. And I think that after I had done this project, or I was starting the project with the Preludes project, and even before, when I was with my piano duo Artia, I realized that I needed more. It wasn't enough to do the premiere. And part of it was because you can't really get the essence of a piece in one performance.
Right.
And I couldn't do it with Brahms. I couldn't do it with Mozart. So why should I expect to do it with a piece that's just been written? I mean, you really need to sit with it for a little bit. The difficulty is that when you have new music, a lot of people want to hear it because this is what I wrote yesterday.
Right.
And so those two things just didn't complement each other well in my mind and how I want to approach. And I think as I approached, I hate to say adulthood, but in the way of more musical maturity, I didn't like the rush jobs anymore.
Right.
So I feel that now I am working with composers that are more interested in the long-term commitments. And Tony Landman is one of them. My husband, of course, is one of them. Yeah. And I think it has nothing to do with age. It has to do with approach. And I just premiered a work by Charlie Peck, and I think Charlie Peck is a wonderful composer, young composer. And he wrote a piece, and I kind of laughed, where he said that, he says, well, if you want people to know, he says, this is what I used as the basis of the piece, and it was these pitch collections. And I said, yeah, I said, Charlie, but this is what I hear. And we both laughed about it because I wasn't coming from the idea of pitch collections or rhythmic motives, and I was talking about it from a much more emotional standpoint. And I find with those particular composers, when I can have those conversations, a lot of times they will tell me, "You showed me something in the piece that I didn't know was there."
That's great.
And I actually think that part is more rewarding, and I like that type of study, but I think other composers probably wouldn't like to hear that that's my goal.
Right.
And I think because I think they They have their idea that this is what they're going to do, and that we just interpret what is already in their head. But I don't think that's how I personally approach it, and I think that I've been more successful. I'm noticing I'm trying to be careful with this, because I think that there's a reverence that you have for the score, and there's an understanding that you have to have from an audience perspective. And then you have to understand that the performer is that interpreter that is the go-between.
Yeah.
And so I may change certain elements of any piece, whether it was written by Beethoven or Chopin or Brahms, based on audience reaction. And I don't mean something that's really drastic. I'm talking about, I may play something a little louder because they're a little more really, that sort of thing. But I think that there's a way that you can interpret space. And you have to do that with the hall, with the piano, and it goes from thinking about every individual note and thinking about the audience perception, and then how the composer is going to do this. I feel that the composers who really want to have a particular mood, an idea, a perception conveyed, I think that that's very flexible. But I think that you have to choose your performers wisely,
right?
Because I'm not going to be the person who's going to get the piece in hand and rush it to a premiere so that it's premiered. But I am going to be the person who wants to think about it and wants to really study it carefully and do my best interpretation of it that I can do.
Right.
And I think that most people have been really open to that.
Yeah.
But, you have to, sometimes the mix isn't right.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean, that is...
And that's okay.
It's that composer-performer relationship, it's always important, because the composer has to realize the performer, you're not only interpreting it, you're interacting with an audience. If you're a good performer, you're reading the audience, and so you're interpreting it for that audience. So it's not just that you're interpreting it for the audience that you have at any given night or day.
Right.
And not only that, but as a pianist, you're interpreting it on whatever instrument is provided.
Right.
You're not bringing your clarinet, onto the stage. You're working with whatever is given you. And that was something. Thank you for that answer. I know that's being diplomatic is tricky, but I really appreciate what you were saying about the collaboration. But to go into a slight tangent, in that interview you were talking about instruments and your love for learning an instrument. So you're learning pieces and you're learning composers and reading audiences, but you're also learning, it sounded from that interview that you're really learning the instrument as well.
Right. That's exactly it. And in fact, I realized that people could just write this off as, boy, this woman is nuts. But when I go to a new piano, I have to have a little bit of time to make friends with it. And I know what the piano will want me to do and what the piano will not want me to do.
Right.
And it was interesting because I premiered some pieces by Tony, and I picked tempos that I thought would work for that space and for that piano. And I kind of had some other pieces in mind, and I was glad I didn't program them. They weren't on the program, and I was glad I didn't bring them because I thought, this piano wouldn't have liked that. And I actually used those words when I was talking with Tony later, and he says, no, I don't think it would have. And, there were certain things that I found that it changed. And one of Kirk's preludes, actually, I played, this piano was really suffering in a lot of ways. But I was able to find elements in Kirk's piece that I hadn't found before because the piano was so different from any other piano that I had played. And that's why I say you could just write me off as being nuts. But I think that, I wouldn't have known that on a different piano in a different space. And you wouldn't know that, I don't think, as a composer, what you've written unless you hear it from somebody else playing it in a way that's different than you intended, or different than you perceived, I should say. Right. So I think that's, if you really want to have that collaboration, I think that's possible. And I think I've described this before too, in this way. When you're really, really good friends with somebody, you can see something in him or her that nobody else can see, and that the person can't see in herself or himself. And it's just so obvious. It's so evident. And it could be something really, really beautiful. It's not something necessarily bad. It could be something really beautiful that they just don't see in themselves. And that's what I see in a piece. At least I try. And I try to bring that out. And I think that if everybody knows that you're all trying to have that common goal of bringing a performance to the best level you can, the top level you can, I think just to know that it's coming from a good place and not a manipulative place, then I think, we all win.
Right. I just wanted to make sure that you got to talk about everything you wanted to talk about, like if there's any special project or anything else you want to mention before the end of the podcast. Do you have anything like that?
Well, I do have a new project. It's called My For Lisa project.
Right, of course.
And this one, actually, I'm pretty excited about, but it really is in its beginning stages. I say it's a beginning stages, even though it's been it's been going on for about a year, but it's still like really beginning for me. I have this really wonderful student who is now 14, but a couple years ago, she genuinely asked me why she was only playing music written by men. And
I saw that tweet.
That's right. and she and because she was at a level that she was playing at that point, and still continuing in this track, Bach preludes and fugues, and she was playing a Mozart concerto, and she was playing music by Chopin. And from a pedagogical standpoint, I mean, these are things that she should be learning to develop colors and sound and technique and whatever. And so it wasn't irresponsible teaching, certainly, but it was a little insensitive, I'd say, because I just wasn't ready for that conversation. And I think that when I teach younger students, I teach music by women composers all the time. And she had heard me play a concert, I don't know, a couple of months before, where she heard me play music by several women composers. So it's not that I was highlighting anything. It was just like that was the natural course. But she just happened to be right in those cracks where she was asking me this. And she also was not born in the United States. She was born in China. And so there are all sorts of things that she was just really curious. She asked me these questions. And so I decided that I needed to be a little bit more proactive with her education and have her hear more music, but then also have her play music. And so I would talk to her. One thing that I don't really talk about when I'm just announcing the project is that I talk to her frequently about my experiences working with women composers. And I say, yes, and I just came back from recording this person's music, or I just came back from performing this woman's music. And so that she knows that it's just, this is normal.
Right.
It's not anything that is just like a one-day thing or one night or an event. It's just, no, I'm talking with this person, I'm talking with this person, I'm talking with this person. And yeah, I just came from this festival and I played music by 4 women. And, so that she knows this should be just accepted norm. And so I started telling other people about it as far as the community music schools, because I really wanted them to see some of this also for my students and for other students, And so I've been talking with my my composer friends who are female, and they've been writing some pieces. And we actually did get one concert last year where Kayla wrote a piece specifically for it, and then it was all by women composers. But my hopes are that I'm going to have quite a collection of pieces that are in that same mix and match variety, exactly like the Preludes project. Right. So I'm mixing Clara Schumann and Fanny Mendelssohn and Ruth Crawford Seeger and Kayla Pearson, Mara Gibson, Michelle McQuaid, Dewhurst, things like that are just like naturally integrated. And Joan Tower, I play a lot of Joan Tower. And so I'm hoping that this is going to go into a number of concerts. And so that's why I say it's in initial stages, because I have a couple of concerts that are scheduled. But I'm hoping this will go into the more recording thing. But a couple other things have to fall into place before that.
Yeah.
But it's exciting. And what I like about it, though, is that it came from the idea of, this was my student asking the question. So it was important for me to convey that to my student. Mm-hmm. And I think I had a young composer say, hey, I know, like, this is the craze in social media, and it's so great that you're part of this. And I said, well, I want you to understand that I actually did this for my student. Mm-hmm. Because it's not that I didn't think that it was important in other venues or areas or ways of expressing it, but I needed to do this for my student. So it's more personal than that. And I think that's, now at this point in my career, I feel like most of my projects have to come from that place. Yeah,
that's the beauty of teaching. I mean, teaching is so hard and it's so exhausting. And I certainly was not strong enough for that path. I ran away from it pretty quickly, but that is the side of it that's really wonderful, is really making a change in a young person's life, changing their perceptions, and especially for little girls, saying like, this is something women do,
Right.
Definitely when I was, 10, 14, even 20, my awareness of women composers was practically nil. I mean, this was when I was 20, Google didn't exist yet. So I think we're at a great time now where information is so easily shared, and I just feel like every day I'm discovering either a woman composer from the past that had kind of been erased from history, or I'm discovering a new young composer, woman composer. And I think that's a really wonderful inspiration for a project like this, is from the position of a teacher saying, this is what's possible to her student. I think that's really inspirational. So I'm looking forward to it. I hope it does turn into a recording project, because we need more recordings of women composers' pieces. So
yeah, well, actually, it's again, some things have to fall into place, but Parma was interested in that, and that makes me happy. And the recording engineer that recorded the Preludes project, I'd love to work with him again. He's been there. There's another mentor I didn't mention, Andreas Meyer. Mm-hmm. I mean, really phenomenal human being, and so I'm really happy that I got to know him, and he helped me out a lot. So yes, it would be great to have that opportunity. I hope that works.
Yeah, I know, putting together a recording, it sounds so simple, but it is not. And it's expensive. So
yes.
I really liked Andreas Meyer, what he did with that Preludes project CD. The quality is so good, and I know that's not a given, like that takes skill. So yeah, I meant to mention that too, that sometimes you get a recording and it's like but this was like, so you really feel like you're in the room with the pianist, and it's so clear and you can hear everything. It's really nice.
So. Well, that I guess I really should have said, and I know here we are rambling on again, but the idea. Kirk wrote incredible preludes. Of course, Chopin wrote incredible preludes. Mm-hmm. The piano that I recorded on at Lafayette, the piano tech for that, Chris Soliday, was really just fantastic, and is one of the best pianos I've ever played, the Steinway. Yeah. And then to be able to work with Parma and Andreas and everybody in the design team, and I probably completely freaked out Brett Picknell from Parma, because as soon as I met him, I hugged him because I was so excited with the cover, they took a picture that I had done. I mean, so just from the beginning, I couldn't have done that. And then the people that helped me with the Kickstarter to cover, that was like 25% of what I needed, and they were able to help. So, it was one of those things that I was really, really happy that I had so many people working toward that CD to make it be what it was. And so, it isn't easy. You have to have a really good team.
Yeah.
So I'm happy.
It's true. Yeah, it looks good. It sounds good. It's, it's hard to get all of that together for recording. So.
Yeah.
Everyone go out and buy it. You want the physical thing. So thank you very much, Holly, for being on the podcast.
Thank you. I really appreciate you asking me to be part of this.
Great.
Yay.
Yay. See you on Twitter.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks again to Holly for being on the podcast. Before we go, take a listen to a clip of her performance of Chopin's Prelude No. 8 in F-sharp minor from the Preludes Project CD.